the lack of knowledge and understanding from the one side of the industry to the other is driving a lot of the negative conversations, which a lot of the time have no context. I think it's also understanding what does the top riders think they need to do to better educate and communicate with the fan base of the sport.
This episode is brought to you by the Horse Truss and Equine Biogenie.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Do you know who is stirring today? Literally every horse person who still has to muck out and get their horses in while they're listening to this podcast. I've been waiting to say that all season. Are you impressed?
So much. I really love that. I was like, we did our preamble as we always do, and then Rhi was like, "Can I start?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." And then she started saying that, and I was thinking, what's she going to say at the end? Not even a mouse. And then, yeah, every horse person, which will be me tomorrow, mucking out on Christmas morning like I do every year. But Rhi, this is the last year that I am going to have to muck out my horses on somebody else's yard and then drive into London to visit my family. Next year, I am going to say to everybody, if you want to come for Christmas, you're welcome. You can come 3 days early. You can bring your horse, you can bring your dog, you can bring your auntie. Anyone's welcome in my slightly larger house than I'm currently living in. And if you'd like, you can help me muck out on Christmas Day. And
I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. I feel extremely lucky because I didn't know that this was a thing because I am so spoiled. But I didn't realise that there are livery yards, as in full livery yards like mine, that just don't include Christmas Day as part of their offering, which I understand from a kind of emotional and festive point of view. But I find it really weird, like logistically, because all of your liveries, like none of them have tools, none of them know the process or the different horses, and I'm just like, is that not just chaos on Christmas Day? And I'm not saying we don't offer to help, because we absolutely do. We are all down there on Christmas morning, but we don't all like just descend on the yard and it becomes chaos because the horses are like, what are you doing? We have a slightly different way of doing it. But yeah, I'm always baffled that yards do that.
Yeah, it would be like a DIY yard, like every day.
Literally would. And the horses would be like, are you okay? What is happening?
But this is also where I when I speak to people, like through consultation and all of the things that I do to help people, when they're on DIY yards and they're saying their horse struggles, I'm like, I'm not actually surprised. Horses are herd animals. So when one person turns up and feeds one horse and then turns their one horse out and your horse is left next door on its own or whatever it might be, like, it's really not brilliant. So no, we definitely do all of the horses on Christmas Day for our wonderful liveries. And I don't even, not many people come and visit. It's just something that I've always done. A couple of them, quite a lot of those horses are my own as well. So it's it's something that I've always done, and it's okay. George did used to help me a bit, but he would kind of moan more than he would help. So now, because we have our CrossFit gym, they do a Christmas workout.
Oh, that's fun.
So I go and do my Christmas workout and muck out, and he goes and does his Christmas workout and mucks out, and we're much better friends because he hates mucking out, and I love my horses, so I don't mind. So if this is you and you are in the trenches, as I called it on my Instagram yesterday, when I was... this is confusing because that was a few days ago, because this is going out on Christmas Eve and we're not recording this on Christmas Eve. But if you are in the trenches and the mud is bad and there's a hole in your welly, dear Liza, and you are having a pretty rubbish time, just know that we have now had the winter solstice, which means that things are going to start getting lighter. The 21st of December was the winter solstice. And so from that day, the tables have turned, the days are getting longer, and spring is just around the corner. So hold on, girls and boys and he's and she's and theys and thems. The end is in sight. Keep going. Push that wheelbarrow. You've got this.
I almost burst into song then. You know that Pocahontas song? Just around the river bend. I was ready to jump in. I won't. Well, I did that. I've done it now.
But you know who you sound like? You sound like Geraldine Gruss. from Zodiac
Guys.
Academy. Honestly, are you a fantasy reader? If you're not and you want to be, Zodiac Academy is the most fun ever. I got interested in it because we've obviously read ACOTAR and stuff. Zodiac Academy is quite a different genre.
Yeah,
It's
it's quite modern. Like they have phones and stuff, and they
have phones.
post on Facebook, and they have
God.
hashtags. It's very funny. It is spicy. It's saucy, just like ACOTAR and Fourth Wing and all of those things. But it is really funny. Like some of the accents that so Geraldine Gruss is a very southern young lady, and she has a very sort of screechy voice in the narrator's interpretation. It's quite funny.
The narrator. So Rhi has listened to it solely. I've read it and listened to it, and I can't listen to her cat chapters because as it goes on as well, the narrator's like really gets into character, and as it goes on, it becomes more and more southern and more like intense. And she's like the true queens. Oh my god! And like she has all these galloping gandicoots and all sorts of hilarious things. She her partner, she calls him her salacious salmon all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's very funny.
Great fun. If you're looking for a laugh, then you could try that. It is spicy though. There are bits of it, and you're like, oh my god, they're writing about that. Right? Okay, here we go. So yeah, not to be read around your family potentially.
Yes, or in the car with the children. Would avoid that too.
Definitely not children friendly. Anyway, how have you been? How's your run up to Christmas going?
It's been good, actually. It's been good. It's been a little bit manic. So we're recording this a few days before Christmas, and I went up to the yard today to ride Harley at lunchtime, but we're so busy at work with everyone, getting ready for the festive period, that I was on calls like in my car, and then I was doing an audio call just as I was getting him ready. And Harley is so cute, and I know I shouldn't anthropomorphize him, but sometimes he looks at me when I'm on the phone and it's like he knows. And today I went up to his stable and he's like, hi. He's like, oh, you're on the phone. And he sort of like looks at me as if to go, I could just see it in his face. He was like, just so you're aware, I've run out of hay because it's like nearly lunchtime, which is when they top up the hay. I know you're on the phone, but I've run out of hay. And I was like, hi, darling. I was like, get you some hay, because I don't like to ride him on an empty stomach, obviously. So I get him some hay, and he sort of eats some and then sort of looks at me as I'm chatting away about this project. And he's like, thanks, Mum. I'll see you in a little bit. It's just, he's adorable. I just love him.
So cute.
He is so cute. So he's doing really well. I think he's getting a bit warm. He was clipped a little while back and he's gone really fluffy, and he felt a little lackluster today. And my friend was like, I wonder if he's just getting a bit warm. Do you find that with yours, if they've grown the coat back a bit?
Yeah. I've had a bit of a nightmare this year, to be honest, because I've not been doing very much with my own horses. I felt like I needed to just sort of check out of Trainingville, and I've just been like playing around with them a lot and doing a little bit. And I rode Blondie a bit the other day, and we had the saddler with Zora, so I rode her. But her coat, it's like she would survive in the Arctic right now. So it's really hard to rug her, because like a 0 gram with no lining isn't brilliant when it's really raining. But like yesterday it was really warm, and it's just been a bit of a nightmare. So yes, agreed. It is the weather is peculiar at the moment, and it's not, it's not the easiest to find rugs and that kind of thing. And yes, they are getting a bit warm, and that is not ideal. Nobody wants a hot horse. So yeah, don't over rug, guys.
Who I can't remember which one it was, but I remember you were in the field with one of your ponies who eats the fence, and I just remember looking at her and thinking, gosh, you look grown up from when you were tiny. Indy. Indy Foal. She just looks so like adult.
She's 6 now.
Yeah. 20, I mean, context was you had Indy as a foal, didn't you?
Yeah, read her.
Yeah. Yeah, that was it. I always get Indy and
Dee
Dee mixed up, which is bad because I don't, not in their faces, but when I'm thinking about their journeys.
They have very different faces. Indy Bindy Chickenhead is her name.
Yeah.
Because she has a funny little
got a chicken on her
she's
head.
got like a chicken head on her head, and she's very cute. Yeah, they're a bit bored.
She does. She looks so grown up.
Yeah, the horses in the field are a bit bored. It's that time of year where they would like really to have a space to come into, I think, and I look forward to that so much. I keep saying to my sweet old retired horse Mo, I keep saying to her, just keep going, because we're going to have a beautiful barn soon. You're going to have a lovely barn with a huge big lovely comfy bed in it, and you can come in and lie down and have a hot bath, and just there's so many things about the yard I'm at the moment which are like creeping along to the end. It's quite funny. Like, I got there this morning and just a bit of a window frame had just fallen out onto the floor. We had in the storm last year, one of the windows, we have like this archway window at the top of the barn, and a tree blew into it, and it's just not got fixed, right? Between you, me, and the gatepost, it's not that there's not that much kind of maintenance that goes on the horse side of things from my current landlords. That's their choice. That's okay. They're aware of the things they haven't got fixed. And there's another piece of it that's just fallen out. My dad boarded up the window actually the other day because a couple of the glass panes had dropped out in that storm and it hadn't been fixed. And through the summer it was fine. And then with the rain, we were really noticing it. And I've kind of got this image of like there are certain things that are just sort of slightly not 100% that need some TLC, and because we're leaving, we are not the people going to be putting the TLC in. And I kind of have this imagery, like, you know, in Indiana Jones when they like make it out of the tomb and then the tomb collapses. I feel like I'm going to walk the last horse out of the barn, it's just going to go and just crumple because no, I'm only joking. I'm being very I'm making a joke. It's not that bad. If you are the person who may be about to re-rent my current facility, it's fine. It's just there are some things that need some love, and they haven't had it for a little while, and that's okay. But yeah.
Do you know what you remind me of? When you work an office job and you hand in your notice, and sometimes it's like a month or like 3 months, depending on, you know, the thing. And like the minute you're always like, yeah, I'm going to be really diligent, da, da, da. And then you hand your notice in, and it's like the second you do it, you suddenly go, and the motivation just like disappears, and you start seeing everything in a slightly different light, and you're just like, I'm done. You've handed you've like mentally checked out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So funny.
I had to do a load of fencing this week because one of the young horses that we have on, he's with us on like training livery, but he's having some time out in the field. He just walked through a fence. Just walked through it.
What?
Just knocked it down. Yeah, like it was obviously maybe one of the fence posts was a bit rotten at the bottom, and he literally just walked out of the field. As far as we can tell, the fence was just like flopped over at one point. So we had to do some quite major fencing repairs this week. For like 5 hours, me and my darling parents, who I am so eternally grateful for, so grateful, in fact, I bought them a really nice Christmas present that I was like, I'm not really doing Christmas this year. We've got so much money to spend on the new project. I'm absolutely not spending money. Yeah, I did. I bought them really nice fleeces from Schofel. I thought, you know what? If they wear fleeces a lot, that's a great piece of equipment for. I wear a fleece all the time. This jumper has featured in more of these podcasts I'm wearing today than most pieces of clothing I own. So this is only from Mountain Warehouse. It was a real cheap and cheerful one, but it's still one of my favourites. I bought them these really nice things. Anyway, what I was going to say was they came and they helped me do all this fencing, but at the same time of doing it, I was like, I really begrudge doing this because I'm really checked out of this, exactly like you're saying. But the place will be left as I arrived at it, and that is the rules, and that's absolutely fine. It's just maybe a little harder than I would like.
Yeah. Do we dare ask about timeline again? Have you got more of a...
Well, I get two answers from two different people. So when I speak to the lovely builder, who I must buy a Christmas present for, actually, that's my plan, I've got to do that. They say that they're ahead in certain areas with the house, because it's all tying on the house, really, because the stables and everything are kind of the barn is nearly finished, and then we're just going to be putting the internal stables in. I have actually now announced, though, that we're going to be working with Monarch on the stables, which is like
so exciting.
Dream come true. Can't really believe that we're having Monarch stables. And yeah, so he says that they're like a couple of weeks ahead, and this is going really well, and that's going really well. And then I speak to the powers that be, that were actually the people who would like give us the keys, and they're like, oh yeah, we're probably looking a bit like it's probably going to be March. And I was like, oh, they had said February, so it's hard. I don't know if it's
TBC.
completely TBC basically, but we just keep being hopeful that it's soon. So yeah, keep posted on that one.
We will. And actually, speaking of that, one thing we should update you on before we dive in with our guest is that this is the last episode of season 5, and Miri and I are going to take season 4. Is it
season 4? Yes.
Should I say that again? Well, I've done it now. Leave it in. Sod it.
What are you
Welcome
going
to
to do?
behind the curtain. What are you going to do? What's going to happen? They're going to shoot me? I doubt it. I'm like a whippet. Sorry, if you don't understand that reference, that's okay. But if you do, that might have given you a giggle. I've lost my point now, train of thought. So, it's coming to the end of season 4. This is our bonus episode. And then we're going to take a little bit of a longer break than normal. Miri is obviously moving house. And we want to make sure that the next season is as good as possible. And it takes a lot of prep behind the scenes to do this. So we don't have an exact date yet, which we normally do. But we're likely going to come back in the spring. We will update you both on your podcast feed, because we'll do a little message to be like, hey, we're going to come back on this date. So keep an eye out for that. And also on our socials. So just keep track. There is a This Equestrian Life pod Instagram channel, so you can have a look on there. But yes, it's going to be fun. We've already got guests in mind.
If you want to keep up to date with us, though, give us a follow. If you listen to this, if you somehow stumbled upon this without our social media, A, good for you, because well done for not being on Instagram. But B, Rhi and I both post quite a lot on our socials. Yeah. I'm also posting now consistently on YouTube about the new project. So if you haven't, please go and watch those videos, because that would really help me.
They're really fun.
But, maybe you and I would come back for a random one. Maybe you and I could say we'd come back for a random mid-Jan catch-up or something. But we'll see how we go. See how we go.
So, final conversation of the season, we are going to catch up with Christine. So Christine founded Equerry, and Equerry is a consulting, well, she might describe it differently, but Equerry to me is a consulting firm who are really industry leading in the equestrian space. They see the equestrian industry, I think, like the corporate strategy the type of stuff that I do, in the sense that they see it the way that other sports see themselves, the way that F1 see themselves. It just feels a little bit more professional than maybe I've seen in other parts of the industry. And so they do a lot of strategy, they do a lot of consulting and social and marketing and events. And one thing they noticed this year was that a lot of decisions and conversations were happening in the equestrian space without being underpinned by any data. And so this year they've really focused on case studies and studies in general that really try and provide insight and data to the space. And one study that they've actually done recently was with Hartpree, and it was a qualitative study into the perceptions of equine welfare from horse owners. So basically looking at what horse owners consider to be central to equine welfare, what they're worried about, what they're most focused on. Really interesting stuff. So we're going to talk to Christine a bit about the work that she does, about this study, and then I guess about her vision for 2026. And I think it's going to be really cool.
I think as well, I'm really looking forward to talking to her a bit more about what is driving this, because I think this is what is very important to us, and as a podcast and as a kind of collection of people, is where is equestrian sport going and why is that important to us? And, what are these people who are slightly more influential, I suppose, what are they doing about it, and how can we all as a collective be doing more? So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think this is going to be cool from a data perspective, from a horse welfare perspective, and also from a what can we all be doing? What's 2026 going to look like? What's 2027? What can we all be looking forward to in terms of horse sport? Can't wait.
All right, let's bring her on.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor of this season, the Horse Trust. It's been a real honour to talk about the wonderful work that the Horse Trust does. Since 1886, they've been providing sanctuary and specialist care for horses who need it most. Retired service horses, rescue cases, and those needing a safe place to land. What makes the Horse Trust special is their focus on long-term welfare, from tackling equine obesity through their Way to Win programme to building peaceful retirement pastures. They're not just caring for horses today, they're shaping better welfare for tomorrow. If you'd like to support their work, head to thehorsetrust.org.uk. We really appreciate the support of the Horse Trust this season. and we look forward to sharing more about the wonderful work that they do in the future. Welcome to the podcast, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us today. Rhi obviously has given you a bit of an intro, but it would be really cool to hear about your story, about Equerry, about the work that you do, and what's really important to you and why you do it.
Oh, thank you for having me, first and foremost. And yeah, ultimately, I'm just a girl who likes horses. Loves, actually, loves horses. And that's why I'm here. That's what I do, I started out like most girls do. I went to riding school and cried every night so I could get a horse. My family's not horsey. So, every day I begged my parents. They got me this wild feral pony that just was insane. And when I told her, actually, she went to the World Championships doing mounted games. Like, utterly insane pony. But she was diddy, so I couldn't have her for very long because I'm rather tall. And I went on to retraining sort of race horses and just always operating with such a small budget. But I always wanted to ride in the Olympics and, do all of those things. And unbeknown to my parents, I actually would take the bus to school during A levels, get off the bus in town, take the bus to where I would have my training sessions and lessons, etc., help them breaking youngsters and, ride horses, take the bus back, change back into normal clothes, take the bus back home from school and then go and do my horse. Like, so I was quite naughty like that because I was bored of school. And I went from there onto sort of grooming and working at big competition centres, etc., in Europe. And I just loved the industry and ultimately the passion that people have for horses and the sport. That said, despite the Olympic dream, I was never good at competing because I'm not a competitive person. I don't have any interest. I just liked the feeling the horses give when they understand something new. And that's why I like the youngsters. But at one point, my mum said, you have to go to university. So I moved to England so I could study genetics and reproduction in horses. So that was my way to sticking it up to my parents, saying, well, I'll continue with the horses. But yeah, so that's sort of, I guess, the backstory. And I've been here since 2010 and spent a long time ultimately looking at sperm under a microscope. So that was my background. But the reason I ended up in marketing is essentially because whilst I was grooming and, involved with events when I was younger, I was always quite stumped by the lack of understanding from people that would come into this industry and be involved, whether they were sponsors of riders, sponsors or partners of the events. They always had these ideas. I just always thought, well, that's stupid. And I'm not saying that, I'm always right, probably the opposite, but I was curious to what can be done better. So after freelancing for a while here in the UK, running events, enforcing or being a part of the team that enforced Drawn Order as a rule for British show jumping, not with British show jumping, but at a competition venue here in the southwest of England, which, funny to look back because come February, you would have 200 riders wanting to, or 200 rounds, be due to be jumped, and you would know when you would finish and when you would start and finish, sorry. And it was a turning point to me, just yet again highlighting how the industry is so behind. Like, you have digital systems that can handle the entries. You can allocate time slot like you would do for an international show. So it was fun for me to get involved on a consultancy and freelance basis with various aspects of the industry. But again, everything always tied back to the lack of reasoning behind why we do things, which is ultimately why I decided to set up Equerry Co, which in its, very early years was like most other agencies, I guess. Oh, we do social media marketing and we create content, and it's been a steep learning curve. I think I've made every mistake that you can make as an entrepreneur, but also every mistake that you can make in relation to marketing and building our strategies. But I think what makes us different is that we will go out and put our necks on the line in creating something that is bigger than just a reel or just a social media post. Because to me, unless it's rooted in data that talks to the wider equestrian audience, it doesn't matter if it's a federation or if it's a professional rider, it needs to be rooted in data, it needs to be rooted in knowledge, and it needs to carry storytelling that appeal to a fan base. And that's what I think at the moment, if I had to pick one thing, our sport does really badly. And slowly but surely we are, bettering.
I mean, I love the way you described that. And I'm really interested as to whether or not there was a turning point for you in our industry where you really felt like we need to change something. Like for me, there were a couple of Olympics. I mean, well, I think it was before Paris, where I just started to think, oh, and social license started to bubble up, and I was like, oh, this isn't enough anymore. We can't just pretend that people, well, they don't get it, so it doesn't matter. Was there a moment for you in the industry being much closer to the top of the sport where you were like, it's not enough, and then you pivoted your strategy?
Yes, I think there's been different moments, and I think the different moments have allowed me to look at actually there's not just one, social license is one part, and I will argue that of course there's welfare tied to this, but social license is ultimately a marketing issue for me, the way I see it, which I know is a very bold statement, and people might have my head for saying that, but there are elements of how people do sport and manage their horses that are fantastic, but we never hear that side of the story. But ultimately, when it comes back to what triggered it for me, I love reading science. So I think in part it was the disconnect between science and also working with a client in the US that were focused on positive reinforcement training for ridden horses. And I remember traveling to the US. I was like a few months pregnant, first time I ever went to the States. I was horrified. And I met these people, and I've said this to them, I thought it was a little bit woo woo. You don't want the horse to go over the pole, and you're giving it a pat. Why would you give it a pat? Like old fashioned in my approach to training horses, and I will admit that. Um, but it's not soft, but their structured approach to allowing the horse to have a say in the training made the horse want to do the task, and there was no kicking, no, what you expect to see, what I'd always seen, what I would probably rely on myself. And for me, that was quite a big wake up call. And in relation to those, the guys over there, we did some research, which, I'm sure we'll get to. But I think the lack of understanding ultimately between what is required from top level sport riders and horses and their execution and what we do, as amateurs, just like me, with our horses, and the outpouring of all of our resources, all of our emotions that we pour into these animals because we love them and we love how they make us feel. There's a disconnection, like communication. And of course, there is an element of lack of learning theory at the top of sport. Professional riders don't necessarily understand why they do something. They do it because it's learned. And that doesn't mean it's always wrong, because their timing is impeccable. The timing of a professional dressage, show jumping event, like their timing in training horses is impeccable. But you can talk to anyone, even, one of the famous trick training people here in the UK. He said to me in a conversation that positive reinforcement, no, I didn't do that. And I was like, well, you kind of do. You just don't know what it is. And I think I'm not saying that we have to all go down this road of everything is positive reinforcement, but we need to have evidence behind what we do at top level, and we need to have understanding of what is required at top level. And I think it's that grey area in the middle that for me is interesting to talk about.
And complicated to talk about,
Mm,
because we've always done it like that. That's just the way I do it. it's working fine, but the horse is winning, but it makes money, but da 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 da. How do you, like, are you approaching this? And I would love to hear your sort of, like, what do you feel is the way in to improving this conversation?
Well, we're actually starting this, which I think is part of the parcel, if you like, might answer your question, or at least that's how I see it. We are starting this research in January alongside Harvard University, which is an interview series where we will talk to ideally the top 10 riders from the FEI disciplines to understand what they feel is the lack of understanding ultimately, and also bake into that topics around learning theory. But we won't ask them direct questions. We can't say, hey, Bob, why don't you do XYZ, or do you do XYZ? That won't answer the question. So we'll have a sliding scale within the answers that they give that will guide the questions that we will follow up with, so that we can understand not just what they feel is missing for the storytelling around the sport ultimately to come alive, but yeah, also to understand the learning theory that they base all of their actions on.
Do this is maybe controversial. Do you think they know that there's something wrong?
Yes, not
Okay.
of course, not everyone. I don't think, and there is an element, I will, yes, agree that there is an element amongst riders that if they're winning, they don't necessarily query what they are doing. They can't necessarily see any wrongdoing. So I can see that. But I also firmly believe that when you're talking to people who are, they are athletes, they live for winning, but they also know that that can't be at the detriment of their horse. So their horses are, well managed. That doesn't say that we should never change rules around bitting or tack or anything. I'm not saying that at all. But if you talk to top riders whose driving force behind what they do is first and foremost, I think, especially the older generation, love for horses, that does come into it. And secondary to that, passion for winning and ultimately this drive. If you give them a key that is going to improve their percentage chance of winning, they will take it. So I think it's how science is wrapped up and sold to the riders at the moment. So when I speak to, the riders at the top of the sport and we talk about science, because I like to ask them questions, I have no qualms with asking silly questions, or what, at least in their eyes, are silly questions. They will all say without fail that the approach to science taken by federations and, by scientists, they feel is not necessarily related to how they treat their horses, because it feels like one box and all their horses have to fit in the box. So that's how, when you have, say, Andrew McLean stand and talk, on behalf of ISIS and whatever findings they've got, the riders roll their eyes and go, well, why does that matter? My horses aren't just one and they don't all fit into this box. I have to have a varied approach to how I train them. And I think that's lost in translation when you have federations, like I said, scientists talk about the science of why and the welfare science. And also, I do think it's very important to say that, and we can probably disagree to a certain extent on this, but the science that is done behind, the welfare of horses is predominantly done on your riding school horses or your horses do the Harprey. None of it to this date is done following the management regime or the traveling plans, etc., for an international top horse. So there is a big data gap there. So I would argue that part of that conversation feels very much like we're trying to fit this Formula One horse, if you want to call it that, into the stable of, your happy hacker or your amateur horse, which there's nothing wrong in wanting to do that, but there's things to learn from both sides.
There's an interesting thing that keeps popping up in my head, and you don't have to answer this if it feels too difficult to say publicly, so just, let me know. But I keep thinking about this triangle that you've made me aware of, which is you've got the top riders, you've got well, maybe it's even a square, top riders, everyday riders, federations, and then the fourth square corner would be the public, although not so relevant here. And how they're so disconnected in their views, but also maybe in knowledge and understanding. And I think one really good recent example of that is the reaction to the FEI blood rule. And we talked about this on the podcast. You and I have talked about it separately. And I think you have a slightly different perspective on that than we did, because our perspective was, in a nutshell, it doesn't matter if it's accidental, it shouldn't exist because it creates room for corruption, because judges or what they called officials, judges or officials are afraid to correct a rider or discipline a rider. But actually, when I spoke to you, you had a different point of view on how that went out to the public. So I wonder if we can talk about that in relation to this, the difference between the top and the bottom of the sport, as it were.
I think ultimately, and this is like jumping into hot water, I guess, I'm not in a position to talk on behalf of federations, so I can only talk from the way I see the role. And if I was to talk about the role from a communications perspective, but I think the blood rule, or Article 259, which is the correct thing to call it, because I think we're already starting on the back foot by calling it a blood rule. Article 259, I've got a notice, I'm going to look at the side, and the way it was portrayed in media, which is probably the biggest like communications and marketing flop of the year, PR flop of the year, is that people notice that horses can compete with blood on them, and that's what they hung on to. And of course, there is element around that can lead to things like signal dilution around horses and horse sports, moral distancing, which is, I think, what you touched on, alongside trust erosion and normalization of like deviance in relation to horse sports. Like, that's all issues. But when you read the rule, it's in its entirety, alongside the articles that are woven within this rule, the original excessive use of spurs, abuse of the horse, disciplinary proceedings, there's no change to the existing rule. Everything that was there before still stands, but you now have transparency, professional oversight, and clear escalation of repeat behavior, which we didn't have before. So I think that's probably first and foremost like the most important part. Then the one thing that you also didn't see previously was that if a horse on a Thursday was competing and was eliminated, it could still go out and compete the following day or for the rest of that weekend. And there was no requirements for it to be assessed by a veterinarian or a delegate on the ground. Whilst now it has to be assessed for it to be allowed to go forward and compete. Yeah, I think the mandatory fitness to compete checks that the FEI delegates and veterinarians will undertake ultimately safeguards the horse more than was done previously. And I know I said to you, Rhi, when we spoke, that the one point perhaps that I find maybe worrying in relation to communications around this rule is that if we have a horse in the next Olympics on the podium with some mark of blood on it, might be accidental, so on and so forth. But if we have a horse on the podium as opposed to a horse being eliminated with blood on it, that could cause a media storm that we do not want. But as far as I see the rule in its entirety, the rule for me is stronger than it was before.
It's a very interesting perspective, and I found that conversation with you really fascinating about how quickly things can be, stormed up in the media. And I think we're guilty of that. We read a few parts of it. To your point, I understood the rule, but not necessarily thinking about it in the context of all the other rules and therefore what it means in those contexts. So I think that's completely fair. We talked about this before, but I'm keen to hear your answer here. When I look at other industries, I have seen a shift in the last few years in particular, where because of the way that social media has developed, federations have moved from being these kind of untouchable buildings and presences where you can't really get in, you can't really have a conversation, it's very much a one-way conversation, to seeing people like Adam Basuri, who's the head of Instagram, being a public-facing voice, speaking to the public on his Instagram account, which of course is on Instagram because he's the head of Instagram, He goes back and forth with people, he answers questions, he answers difficult questions, he creates a dialogue between him and the audience. I've seen the same thing actually with some people who are working for British Eventing on Facebook. They're in the Facebook groups, they're answering questions, they're defending decisions. I can't help but wonder why the FEI, and maybe this is a bold statement from me, but that's okay, why the FEI, etc., don't take the same approach of having almost figureheads who will jump out and say, hey, you're misinterpreting this rule, you're misinterpreting what we've done here. I mean, do you have a perspective on that?
I agree with you in that there needs to be someone stepping forwards and talking on behalf of why something is done or how something is done, or being willing to go, hands up, yeah, we should have done that differently. And I think we've seen a slight trend around that more so. I think it must be spurred from the German Federation perhaps, but we saw Jessica von Bredow after Stuttgart where she won, and there was uproar on social media where the horse was, people talking about it looking lame in during the prize giving, etc. And I think she did a really nice piece where she said, well, this is all the negative backlash I get. This is what I have to operate with. And no one is bearing in mind that this is an 8-year-old or 9-year-old horse under spotlight during a prize giving in a big indoor. It's a big atmosphere. It gets tense. Like, no one is bearing that in mind. And here's a video of it during the trot up earlier in the day. So I think being able to take that stance and carry that dialogue, I think, is very important, because it's about education. And I think without education, there is frustration. And, compare it to your example, Rhi, sometimes it's harder, I think, to operate within this sport, not even sometimes, I think always, because everyone that are fans and have horses themselves, or ride at riding school and have a social media account, or have a cat and has never ridden but love animals, they all have an opinion. Whilst if you're talking about football or you're talking about Formula One, it's quite easy to go out and turn things into a joke, or create a positive conversation on the back of something negative. But because everything that we do, because we're involved with horses, is emotionally charged, that is a really hard area to navigate. But I agree with you. I would like to see the storytelling around the sport, but also the knowledge sharing, because that's what it comes down to, I think. Breaking down those barriers by sharing knowledge and sharing the why something has been done a certain way. That would be best place coming from federations and top level athletes through strategic PR. And I'm not saying strategic PR to hide something. I'm saying strategic PR to look at what line of communication is missing, because there is a big portion of the pie that we're not talking about.
I think this for me is one of the hardest things, and one thing that I have been sort of rewarded for and encouraged to do, and that is transparency. And that is, I think, a big portion of this. And I think that the federations, the governing bodies, the FEI, they are as good at it as anybody else, because they are, like you're saying, this media storm that took place around the blood rule, or like you were saying, Article 259, is that right?
Yeah.
There was this uproar about it. You have the bridleless, the barefoot, the bitless, that community that are like grabbing this and running with it as fast as they possibly can. It takes a lot of force to draw blood. It does all of these things. And I was suckered into that. And I'll be completely, honest about it, I didn't do enough research, because hearing you speak about that, I'm like, that's very interesting. Actually, this rule has changed and improved on what it was before. And yes, we should not be drawing blood from a horse. My goodness gracious, you really do have to do a lot of force to do that. And that's not what this rule was encouraging. And that was what the media storm was.
Yeah.
And this transparency from the top of the sport, this lack of conversation at the top, where these riders just stop talking. They just disappear off the face of the earth, as if they don't hold any power, any conversation. It's like they have nothing to say on the matter. They have no information to give. no emotion or opinion or anything, and it's bizarre because they are the ones we're all talking about. And you know, us on this podcast and our followings predominantly are going to be those people who are the ones who are attending the big shows to watch the 5-star riders, going to badminton. And it's like, you know, where do you see, how can we improve this? What is it? Is it got to be changed by the federation? Is it the riders? Who is the person who holds the cards, do you believe?
I first want to just tie back to one thing you said, which was like the riders didn't say anything. And I think that's important, actually, that the riders didn't. Because can you imagine if Scott Brash or Ben Mayer turn around and gone, I'm pro this, they would have lost their entire fan base near enough, except from, you know, top level athletes who'd already been informed of what this included, you know, this role included. And that's why, just like you have a hospital worker, you have an organization that supports you, there are organizations in place that support the riders. And I think it's the communication from those bodies and the federations that should have been better. And I think there's times that the riders should speak up. And I think that particularly exists around showcasing what they do and their methods and the life of their horses, and a little bit actually taking a leaf out of the book of an influencer who might have one horse and does that as a sideline, but they need to showcase a side of what they do that feels relatable. So that's something I firmly believe. And also what that would do, which is a much bigger conversation, I won't necessarily dive into that unless you're dying for it, but that also then brings in equity that brands are interested in investing in. Sponsors get more return on investment because there's more to see, more to share. And when they potentially was to hit some hard weather because of conversations around welfare or, you know, questions being asked, the riders will have had transparency there where people can go, well, actually, no, like she or he has shown us all this before. So I think the riders, that's one side of it. But I do think when it comes to the narrative of the sport and the storytelling of the sport, that has to be driven forward from a federational, you know, standpoint, because they are the sport. And I think we exist in this vacuum at the moment where we are so worried as an industry of that negative echo chamber on social media, because you know, I know, you both know, and you have lovely positive communities, but you both know is that a negative headline or a negative context on social is going to drive more engagement than a positive one. So it's sad because the riders, their full-time job is not social media, and they often get their content from grooms. And they also now actually live in this environment where a lot of them operate with no phones at work, not because they do something wrong, because people are so eager to take things out of context and share it, and on the back of that, potentially ruin a rider's career. And then, you know, yes, there are bad apples. We live in a society where there are bad people. So I'm not saying that every rider, every horse, everyone follows the book, but as a norm, they do. But when it comes to the bigger storytelling and the bigger sort of driving the acquisitions around the sport and growing the industry and the acceptance of the sports within our industry, at the core of that are the federations.
It's a really hard one, and look, I'm not in the spotlight of a rider, to your point, but I cannot help but think when it comes to the riders and the ones who do show us a bit more behind the scenes, is it not better to build your own brand, your personal brand, open that door and control that narrative day in, day out, and be like, this is who I am, these are my ethics, this is how I operate, this is how I train, not everything, but so that when that headline, if it happens, your audience are able to go, okay, I mean, that was a really bad judgment call, or that was a really bad moment, but actually I know that they also do X, Y, and Z, and there's a measured approach.
I think that's ultimately, we agree, you know, like the riders need to showcase who they are and what they stand for. And like I said, take a leaf out of the influencers book. it's then also, they run a business, but a lot of them then have to consider, what shall I give up spending money on here versus getting someone in that can help me with this. And the best people to tell that story is someone already on the team who's there with a phone in their pocket every day. But that doesn't necessarily meet the requirements of telling the full story, because their job is also putting horses on the walker, getting horses ready to exercise, grazing, hand grazing, turning in, turning out. Like the there's so many elements. You both know that from having horses. There's so many elements to what goes into a business with horses that in an ideal world, the professional riders would give over their social accounts like Ed Sheeran, and someone managed it entirely. But then they also run the risk of, someone saying that is not true to who they are.
And that, I think, is a big part of it, because I think the problem is the narrative, and I'm guilty of this because I have thought it before. I'm like, the reason that you're not showing this is because you can't, because the way that you train and the way that you keep your horses is unethical, and therefore you can't show the everyday narrative. And so there's also an element of like, if you're choosing not to do this, that is already a narrative.
I think as well, I'm very passionate about this. This is actually the reality of why we don't see how these top riders are doing things, because they couldn't show it. I have worked in big yards. You would not ever be able to show some of the things that go on behind closed doors, unfortunately. And I do not part myself with that in any way, shape, or form. But I know 100% wholeheartedly that unfortunately these moments that sneak out are not, they're not individual incidences. And I'm not speaking specifically about one person by any stretch of the imagination, but having been party to these situations, I know I can say that unfortunately that is true. And one thing that I think is a big part of this conversation is the way that there is not more restriction on how things are done. For example, the Global Champions Tour, there are far too many shows. You can go to a 5-star show every weekend of the year, all year. That is unacceptable, because those riders that are trying their best to make a living, it's an incredibly expensive sport to be part of, are then encouraged essentially to go from one show to another show to another show. And these horses are there, and I've been around the stables and it was horrible. And I don't care. Come at me, FEI, Longines, go for it. Do your worst. Because I really feel like this is the place where these things need to change. And I've said this and thought this for a very long time. It is these allowances that take place that maybe are a part of how we can shift this. Restrictions: you can only jump X number of shows, you can only do this amount of stuff, the prize money will be better because there'll be less shows, it'll be more spread out, whatever it might be. What's your take on my soapbox?
I I I think there's a very big distinction that has been made with regards to your standard 5-star shows and the Global Champions Tour, because the Global Champions Tour is very much a pay-to-play format
Yeah.
compared to the rest. So I know that there is more 5-star shows booked in for next year than there's ever been. There's 101 5-star show jumping show next year. Now, I first thought that is a negative, and I had a conversation with someone last weekend, and they said, well, no, actually, Christine is positive, because what it does do is that you as a rider cannot be at every single one of them, but it increases accessibility to those shows, because it gives the opportunity for riders that don't necessarily have the capacity to travel to the US, but they want to compete in, Europe somewhere, or even in Asia, or wherever they might put some shows up. They have more shows to go to, which improves accessibility of those shows and their further rider education and horse education. I would agree on the fact, and I know this is also a conversation probably every year at the FEI Sports Forum, but I would agree to the fact that something has to be done when it comes to producing the young horses more so than the horses that are competing currently at 150, 160 level. Because I think it's incorrect that you have young horses going in against the clock and are also judged on faults. I think the young horses should have, and this is not my area of expertise, so this is just me and my opinions, but I think there should be areas that protect the young horses and rules that protect the young horses with regards to how many shows they can compete at. And they should take away the time element entirely, at least under 6-year-olds. I think they should just jump as part of an education, because what we are seeing a little bit is that there is a bottleneck, I think, starting to form where you have a lack of horses, and I'm talking more so about show jumping. You have a lack of horses coming forward to the top level because the model that was originally built around young horse classes, which was focused on getting horses into breeding sooner, because the generational gap for horses is so long. If you have a horse going into sport to prove its value and then you breed it when it's older, particularly a mare, you only have a chance of getting a handful of foals out of her. Whilst if you could put them through a performance test, which ultimately is what the young horse classes were originally, you have the same way of proving heritable traits as you would have in a horse jumping actively on a circuit. But the horse would then go to stud, as opposed to then needing to have a sporting career. They did a study out of the US, and I can't remember, so this is totally anecdotal, but ultimately they did a study in the US looking at what horses compete at Grand Prix dressage level and what percentage of those had competed in young horse classes. And ultimately they break down after a certain age, and therefore they don't go to top level. That doesn't exist for dressage. And I did see talk about a study that came out last week, and I can't remember, I'll see if I can find it, I can't remember who did it, but that also looked at 5-star level jumping, and there is no correlation between how often those horses compete and their anecdotal, like I said, quality of life or soundness in relation to that. And again, there was no evidence of it, but I need to find the study and read it properly. I skimmed through the intro and added it into my file of things to read. But I do agree, there needs to be rules in place with regards to, I don't want to call it mandatory breaks, because I do think if you take a horse that is competing actively internationally and then go, well, now he has to have an 8-week break and it's not going to do anything, there'll be horses that can't cope with that because it's such a big change of routine. But I do think there should be something in place, and perhaps you see it more so with riders who have one top horse than you see riders who have multiple top horses. But there should be something in place that at least explains that the safeguarding is already there, because I think maybe that's what's missing. And I don't live in the top level of sport, so I don't know if it's already in place. But there needs to be something there that either enforces wording around this and the rules related to how the horses are protected at the 5-star level.
I'm going to take a moment to talk about the other sponsor of this episode, Equine Biogenie. When we talk about equine welfare, we often focus on training, turnout and management, but there's another piece of the puzzle that quietly affects every horse every day, the environment that they live in. That's where Equine Biogenie comes in. Equine Biogenie specialises in biological, evidence-led solutions to support healthier yards, stables, arenas and paddocks. Their work focuses on reducing harmful bacteria, improving hygiene and supporting the natural microbial balance that horses rely on to stay well. Equine Biogenie helps create environments that are cleaner, safer and kinder without relying on harsh chemicals, and that is very important. Their services are designed to work with nature, not against it. That means fewer respiratory irritants, better air quality in the stables, lower pathogens, less bacteria, less fungal infections, all without dangerous chemicals. What really sets Equine Biogenie apart is their tailored yard-specific approach, because you've done some work with Biogenie, haven't you, Rhi? And it was different to the way that I've worked with them. So can you tell us a bit about how they helped you and Harley?
Yes, so obviously Harley lives at home, but this year we went on our first ever, I was going to say overseas, it definitely wasn't overseas, overnight camp. So we've actually been on a couple of day camps and an overnight one. I took the disinfectant with me in a little spray bottle so that I could spray the stables before he went in them, so that I could make sure that they were safe and clean for him. I have no doubt that the venues have a really high bar for this, but it was like a personal thing that I just wanted to keep on top of. And I've also this winter been using their Thrush Away as just a way of keeping his hooves in good condition when it's a bit muddy and wet, especially because he's out overnight. And bit of a game changer, they have a Happy Hat spray which stops your hat from smelling. I feel as though every time I talk on this podcast, I'm talking about smells and hygiene, and I just feel like that is not a personal brand that I want to go down the route of. But I will say that I'm really excited to use the Happy Hat spray on my body protector, because you can't clean a body protector and sometimes you get sweaty when you wear them. So that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. So I've worked with Biogenie a number of ways. They've come to the yard and treated the whole yard, and it's the most amazing thing. They're kind of like the Ghostbusters. They turn up with these machines and they spray everything: the rugs, the drinkers, the buckets, the stables, the walker, the fencing. We actually did have a case of ringworm on our yard long time ago, and I think it must have come out of the woodwork, literally. And this is the thing with some of these fungal things, bacterial things, pathogens. They can live in the environment our horses are living in without us knowing, and then they can kind of come out at different times of year depending on the temperatures or whatever it might be. So that is one way that I have been working with Biogenie, and I'm incredibly grateful to their support that they have given, and we haven't had any problems like that since I have worked with them. So that's got to be something, because ringworm is something that can live in wood. And then on top of that, we also have the spray that Rhi was talking about, where we can use that ad hoc. So like if a horse leaves, we use it in the stable. Every time a new horse comes, we are making sure that that environment is clean for them in case anything was left behind from the one before. We also use the Thrush Away spray. And it's an amazing thing, actually, to look after the environment that your horses live in this way, because there are so many nasty things that go around with horses. You've got strangles and ringworm, like I mentioned, and staphylococcus, or there's other ones that really affect a horse's breathing. And actually, the kind of horses that we have, they're quite complicated. They can have compromised immune systems, or where they're stressed, they're more, like they can be a bit more immune compromised. So having Equine Biogenie on the team as part of the way that we look after our horses and their welfare is a really wonderful thing. If you are interested in any of what we've just spoken about, we have a very special code, which is down in the show notes, where you can get a lovely little discount. If you're a bigger yard, drop them an email and find out how they could support you and your horses. Back to the podcast. I think that probably takes us really nicely into the study that we were going to talk about today. We've spent 40 minutes not talking about it because we've obviously had so much to talk about, and I'm so grateful to you, because it is really important, I think, to have voices in the equestrian world that are so balanced, and that is something that we really champion here. I'm wildly passionate about horse welfare, and evidently, I get a bit upset in these situations because I think, well, that could be better. These horses are definitely struggling. I'm very aware of what a miserable horse looks like, I suppose, is the issue. And that, I think, it's so great to hear, like you're saying, mandatory breaks actually would be something that would be quite complicated and could actually be detrimental. So is it about just conversation, awareness, having restrictions within one show, for example, like you can only jump so many X number of classes, whatever it might be. But it's so good to hear that is, being discussed, essentially. So we initially came to speak to you about a study that you did with Hartbury College this year around the everyday rider's perception of welfare, was my sort of overview understanding of it. And I was wondering if you could tell us about your findings and about the study itself.
Yeah, so it was called What is Welfare? A Qualitative Study into Perceptions of Equine Welfare of Horse Owners, sorry. And as you know, we've already discussed it, equine welfare is a huge, growing concern. And while we have existing literature that broadly address welfare issues, there is very limited understanding of horse owners' specific perspective on welfare, is particularly in the context of owning and riding horses. So the study ultimately aimed at identifying what aspects horse owners considered essential to safeguarding equine welfare. Now, we did present actually an abstract of this. So Victoria Lewis from Hartbury presented an abstract of this at the International Society of Equitation Science, or ISIS, this summer in Colorado, which was really well received. And like you already pointed out, we did this study in collaboration with Harvard University, and also alongside Villanova Training in the US, which is a facility that focuses on positive reinforcement training of sport horses and ridden horses. So quite a fun, a lot of good conversations was being had, and it's really nice to see them championing this line of communication that ties into top level sport, but also the general perception of horse owners, because I think that, ties quite, not just broadly, it ties in with positive reinforcement and the wider understanding of that. But, we based the survey that we did on earlier research conducted by Dr. Inga Wolfram, who researched the perception of equine welfare within the Dutch equestrian community in 2024. So we took her survey, we tweaked it slightly in including one or two more questions related to perceptions in relation to training, basically. And overall, the results just showed us that horse owners believe that basic care, how humans interact with horses, training and riding, and sort of ethics/personal development are the areas that matter the most for continued or improved welfare for horses.
And when you did the study, was it kind of open-ended where people could just sort of answer whatever they wanted, or did you have a selection of like, do you believe, which is the most important, turnout, feed, knowledge, or something else? Like, how did you set it up?
There was guiding questions, but ultimately every single question had an open-ended opportunity to elaborate on people's, opinions and thoughts. So there was a lot of data to go through. We got over 400 responses ultimately, where we reviewed all of them. So every single written answer to identify patterns in the data, into higher order key themes, and then prominent lower order key themes that contributed to the overall understanding of the topic. And the most important topic out of, all of those that were mentioned was the basic care, or i.e. husbandry, the turnout, access to forage, and social contact. That was the three areas that were mentioned the most. And our findings there align with research actually from 2024 done by Hall and Kay, which also highlights the importance of the three F's, or, French, friends, forage, and freedom.
The French are so important to the horses. They're so important. Honestly, all my horses, all they ever want is just the French. That's it. I love that so much. I'm going to make a t-shirt that says French, forage, and freedom. And people can be like, what? Fantastic. I love
it. Oh gosh, yeah. There was also, as part of this, the horse-human interaction, there was key points that we identified that people consider crucial for welfare as well. And the biggest one was, I think unsurprisingly, especially to you, maybe Miri, understanding horse behavior and spot pain or stress early. That was the biggest, passion point that people raised. Anthropomorphism, so i.e. not attributing human emotions or intentions to horses, that was the second most important one. And then also recognizing that horses are sentient beings and should be treated with respect, that was the third one. So all of those, I think, comes as no surprise really to anyone who has horses. And I dare say, when you talk to professionals and amateurs alike, any of them would utilize those in their daily line of work, whether the work is horses 9 to 5 or horses before work and after my 9 to 5. I think those 3 points in various degree comes into anyone's involvement with horses.
I always find this stuff fascinating, and there is a word for it. Is it cognitive dissonance? That might not be the right term for this experience, but if we know, for example, that turnout is like one of the major things that people that grassroots riders think is important, and then you look at the top of the sport and let's take those travelling horses, for example. Obviously, they're not getting turnout because they're going from one show to another. And I know that actually it's got better and we've got better at spotlighting top riders who do have their horses out in the field. But how do you reconcile when you saw this data versus what we see at the top of the sport? Why is there such a gap? Is it just because there's no power from the top to the bottom? Is it because we can't do top level sport and be ethical? Like, how does this exist? Is that a good question? Don't know.
Well, it's probably a good question, I think, but I think the conversation, it's ultimately a management conversation, or a management question, sorry. And that actually I feel I can draw into a report that was done by or commissioned by the RSPCA and carried out by the University of Bristol and others, which was called Horse Sense. And the report highlights, it came out earlier this year.
I did this. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And it highlights that most horses in England and Wales, especially the many kept for pleasure or leisure rather than sport, do not consistently experience a good quality of life. So I think, yeah, so I think it's a perception question and a management question and understanding what goes into the one side and what goes into the other. And I've had horses in the past that don't like being turned out. Like they don't. After an hour and a half, they want to go inside. And I know that we can turn around and say, yeah, Miri's like, well, I have something to say on this. We can change field, we can change field fence, we can change what forage, hay, haylage, whatever they have access to. If it's raining, maybe they don't want to be outside. They want to come inside and they like their routine. And I'm not saying that is an excuse to strip turnout away entirely, but I think management of horses just does not fit into one box. And it's very easy. Sorry, I'll let both of you talk, but it's very easy to look at management as we need to fulfill all of this, and that has to equate to X hours in the field, or you have to equate to, whatever it might be. Whilst when you take a horse at top level sport, it's walked in hand, it's hand grazed, it's exercised, it's moving more than a horse that would be stood in a stable most hours of the day and maybe get a turnout while someone goes to work, but the field is entirely filled with mud and he stands by the gate because there's nothing to eat there. One can argue that it's great, it's happy because it's turned out, whilst actually it's probably quite miserable. Whilst the other horse that lives, again, it goes back to lack of data, I think, around the routine and management of top level horses. But a horse that has a routine, and we know they like routine, and he knows when it's going to go out, when it's going to be ridden, when it's going to graze, when it goes in the field to graze and it's not hand graze, one could argue that that is more favourable than a horse currently stood in mud in England because that's what we have in the winter.
I think the issue here is that those horses, unfortunately, are so institutionalized that is the issue. It's not that they don't like going out in the field, it's that they don't know how to be a horse anymore. And that is fundamentally where a lot of the issue at the top arises with horses like this. The treatment of stallions, for example. I watched this amazing video that Matt Harnecke and Jessa Drent did recently. They've been doing this whole yard tour thing. And I went looking for inspiration of how to make my YouTube channel successful. And I came back thinking, bloody hell, these people, there was this huge breeding facility somewhere in Denmark, I believe it was, or it was in Europe anyway. And the way that they kept these stallions was absolutely unbelievably unreal. So they have stables where the horses can interact through the stables physically. They had pens at the backs of the stables where the horses can then go and interact over the fences. They then had a short space between the stables and their actual turnout, and all of these horses had turnout every single day for multiple hours, half the day at least. And now I try and have my own horses in the field as much as possible. Rhee's horse lives out overnight, but that is because, and we had a vet come on and talk about this recently, those horses, our horses, we make time specifically for them to be a horse first and then an athlete second. And that, I think, is a summary of what I believe is a very difficult thing. Like you were saying about that your horse who really didn't like being in the field, because there was been a time in their life where turnout stopped potentially prior to you having them, I would imagine. And then you come along and you meet this horse and you're like, well, I hate being in the field. And it's a really hard thing to uninstitutionalize a horse to the point that then they can do this. And often I think horses help horses, making sure they have friends, ponies, someone who's going to not mind them being a bit weird and a bit anxious is a huge part of that. And I think one piece on this is those places, those videos that I watched about those people, they are the things that these top riders need to be watching, because they need to want to change and be able to turn their horses out more. And then they also need to know how they're going to do that. And actually, these, like you say, these top riders that are amazing, their timing is unbelievable. I can only dream of having the timing and the training abilities and all of those things to get these unbelievably athletic horses to do these amazing things. That is amazing. But potentially the want to improve the way the horses are kept is maybe not as high up on their priority list. I'm not entirely sure where I was going with this, but it felt like I really needed to say that after that conversation around turnout. Sorry.
Well, as we were talking, I slightly realised that it was actually quite arrogant of me to assume that just because an everyday rider thinks that turnout is really important doesn't mean that they're able to keep their horse that way. Because I have read, for example, lots of people I think I read one on Facebook recently where someone was like, I'm getting desperate. They were like, I have gone into a 50-mile radius where I live and I cannot find turnout every day during the winter for my horse. And they were like, the answer in that scenario is like, you either don't do that, even though you know that turnout is important, and you would have answered in that survey, yes, it's number one for me, but my horse doesn't get kept that way, or you don't have a horse anymore. And that's actually a very hard thing to do. So I think that is actually something I hadn't really thought about, that like you can believe it's good and still not be able to deliver it.
I remember what you said about the reality of actually what does turnout mean? Like you say, like just putting your horse in a field with no grass and they stand by the gate in the mud isn't necessarily better than a horse who lives in a stable 24 hours a day, but is very, they're trained and then they get hand grazed and they may have small amount of time in a paddock and they may go on the horse walker. There's a lot of movement that goes on, but there's not a lot of like horse time that goes on. They don't get a lot of horse interaction. The horse-human interaction is a lot, but the horse-horse interaction isn't very much. And those people, like you're saying, Rhi, who struggle with that turnout situation. And as someone who runs a yard and is about to move to a yard with less turnout than I currently have, i.e. less space, my understanding of this is what livery yards need to be able to do, and this is very difficult because they're all going to have to start charging more money, is we have to create space in the winter that is suitable for horses, like loafing areas. We had Jane Myers from Equicentral on, that enable these horses, like you're saying, Christine, about these horses that don't really know how to go in the field, that they have this kind of halfway house space where they're out and they can touch other horses. It may be over a fence initially, it may be with another, in a hard standing area where there's hay, where they just get this time to just go and be a horse, but in a space that is functional in the winter, not just mud. This is the kind of the solution, but that takes a lot of finance. And the reality of, I'm very aware of how much money it costs. Trust me, it's a lot. But I know it's a non-negotiable for me. And that's, I think, a difficult space. Like you're saying, Rhi, these people that are having to go miles to try and look for something, the reality is they may not find it, and that's very, very difficult.
I think it's important for me in these conversations to realize that wherever level people operate at, and I understand that the scrutiny will always be higher of people at the top level because it's easy, frankly, I think it's easy to say, they should do better.
Yeah.
But should they, when ultimately most of them, and we can agree to disagree, but like they do what they need to do, not to just get the job done, but to keep their horses happy. And them keeping their horses happy rely on a different management protocol entirely than keeping Bob the Cob happy. That's not because one is more or less important than the other, but I think also it comes down to level of education and knowledge that is required for those two different facets within the industry, if you like. There was a paper actually published this year by Chang, Mills, and Ventura, and that talks about, it discusses quite at length, where equestrian gets information and how enculturation shapes knowledge and how lack of knowledge among equestrians can contribute to welfare issues. And again, I think that ties back to that report, the Horse Sense report, because, I know I already pointed it out, and I'm not pointing fingers at amateurs. I am not at all. But coming from outside of England, the DIY culture here, when I first experienced it, I thought that's fantastic because it gives opportunity for anyone to buy a horse and keep it because it's affordable compared to a lot of other sort of half board, full board, so on and so forth. But what it also allows, which I think it exists, don't get me wrong, it exists, but to less an extent, maybe in Europe and other areas, is that you can have 2 riding lessons and you can buy a horse and you have no idea of how to feed it, what to feed it, how to rug it. And I say this with nothing but respect for the people that want horses and definitely do their best for them. But, I've been at DIY stables where horses have died of stress colic from overheating, from being over-rugged. And I think a big issue for me, like going back to what I said, it's easy to say that they can do better, but actually the knowledge, which I think ties back to what I said earlier as well, like the lack of knowledge and understanding from the one side of the industry to the other, um, is driving a lot of the negative conversations, which a lot of the time have no context. And I think, the welfare challenges among non-sport horses are just as serious, if not sometimes more so, that those at top level. And I agree that, yes, of course, we can do better when it comes to rules around bitting, so on and so forth. But when it comes to understanding, I think the understanding piece is for me the most important. And we need more data on the communication that doesn't currently exist between the two very different areas of the industry. Because ultimately, when you then go on to socials, and I'm going to wrap this up, but like when you go on to social media and you are a professional rider, I can actually take this as an example from, my own company's socials. We share weekly news every week, and we mentioned a few weeks back that Charlotte Jardine was going back to compete at Olympia or London International. And the amount of negative comments that we received on that post because of Charlotte, that annoys me. I'm not going to discuss what was done and what has been done in the past, quite frankly, because I'm not interested in doing so. But she has served the punishment she was given. And we are still so keen on driving this negative conversation. But when I then go in and look at the individuals that have commented, they are generally, young teenage girls or people that might ride at riding school or people who own a dog and has never ridden in their life. And that's the conversation that the federations have to fight with. That's the conversations that the riders have to argue with. But they're in no position to win those conversations. And that's where I think, again, it goes back to let's fill in this big blank that sits in the middle, because no one is doing something, most of the time anyway, no one's doing something to hurt their horse or their horses, whether that is for the pure pleasure the horses give them or the pleasure and the fact that it's their job to go out and compete.
I absolutely agree. I think there are exceptions to the rule, but I think on the whole, There is no point in having systems and rules and punishments if you cannot have a redemptive arc, because it just means that someone is punished once, done forever, and that's it. And there is that is not a system that anyone can fairly exist in. And so I absolutely believe in a redemptive arc. Absolutely. I do think there is this little bit of an undercurrent, and I think it's driven by a lack of trust with the federations of the everyday rider, of being like, but it won't be different, but it won't change. Prove it to me. Prove it to me. And that there is an arrogance in that, but I do believe, and I hope that data could be the answer. One, I think building trust between the everyday rider and the federation, so that energy of like, prove it to me, prove that it won't happen again, dissipates a bit. But also having the data of being like, actually there are nuances with the top level of the sport and sport horses, and this is what it looks like in the data, and hopefully, like you said, the data can bring us closer together.
Yeah, it's interesting because we do, obviously, it's our job to do a lot of social listening. And when we are actively engaging with audiences to understand what they want to see, and when it came to legislations, and I think this was shortly after the FEI General Assembly in November, we did ask our audiences, well, who do you think is responsible for upholding welfare standards? Do you think it's veterinarians, researchers, the FEI, or national federations, or riders? And everyone says riders. And then in relation to that, who do you trust will put welfare at the forefront and bear welfare in mind when they're engaging with their horses? And the same four options. And riders was top one. That's what everyone says. And it's then, I feel like it's an oxymoron when we always have this conversation about what the riders don't care. And I'm not saying you two do, but like the general consensus is that the riders don't care, they just want to win. Whilst no, they have to love the horse first, but they also have, I guess, part privilege and part sort of sword for their own back, is that they are competitive individuals and their job is competing the horses. But that doesn't mean that they love them any less. And I had a very interesting conversation last week with someone who is involved with British show jumping, or the team, and he said that the biggest frustration, he's a seventh generation horseman and has competed internationally himself, is now late 60s. He said, when I have riders coming to me now versus 10, 20 years ago, the riders now care about winning. Like the teenagers, they want to win. They don't love their horses first. Whilst the people that I know, the people that compete currently at top of the sport, they love their horses. And the horse comes first. And I think that's also goes back to the storytelling and goes back to the other areas that we touched on. Don't come forward. But I think part of this ties to research that we have done, but is currently being, the results, we're going through them, is that during the Olympics in Paris, we had a photographer on site for various reasons. But, one of the things that we wanted to capture was images from the dressage, the cross country, and the show jumping, the behind the scenes, and sort of the training that happens around the competitive stage. And we put those into a survey where we wanted people to, again, open-ended questions, give us their first and foremost rank. This is my favorite image to my least favorite image. And then give us a reasoning why they picked a favorite, why they didn't like something. And we did a random selection of those images. But the images are all, which we did, we cleaned them out prior, we anonymized the riders, so you can't see any faces or, flags on the saddle pad, etc. But we also made sure that the pictures were what we as media consider positive pictures of horses in sport. So yeah, there might be an ear that is listening, or you might see a little bit of white in an eye, but there's no mouth are gaping open, and reins pulled as if they're coming to a big jump. None of that was included, because we want to understand what positive imagery of horses in sport means to people and what they see. And interestingly, you can giggle actually at it, because the World Horse Welfare Conference, they're talking about horses actually they don't like being patted, but the favorite images that everyone would rank would be, across the disciplines, the training and the behind the scenes, is the patting of the horses. that's what everyone loves. Like that's their favorite photo. Um,
But that is interesting, because that to me isn't because they like patting horses. It's because that is a symbol of a rider who
yeah,
cares about that horse's experience, who wants to provide praise. And it's just because patting the horse is just the only visual symbol we have. If we
yeah,
changed it to everyone holding a sugar cube and we did that for 10 years and that's what everyone did at the end of a round, that
yeah.
would become our visual signal. But to your point, there is a lag in what we know is right versus, or what we know is evolving versus what we do. I mean, I still do it sometimes. I catch myself, I think I did it in my lesson the other day, where I started patting and then I was like, oh no, it's scratch. But there is a lag. But I think the visual symbolism is super interesting, and I'm interested to see the results of that. The data is just gonna, I think it will change a lot, actually.
I
Yeah.
hope so. And sorry, Miri, it's correct what you're saying, Rhi, with regards to the visual cues, because those contribute to the positive perception of horse sport. And hey, I'm not going to brush under the carpet that I want to have horses at the Olympics in 20 years' time. I want that, because without it, I don't really know where the industry is going to go. And yes, there's other things in the Olympics, but it feels like this grandstand where we have an opportunity to be seen by the public who, unless see us in negative context in media, don't really have much to say about us at the moment. We're not a betting sport. We're not on the, in the headlines like racing. Um, so I do think it's important to understand how different groups of equestrians interpret the same images, because again that goes back to what we've been talking about, knowledge and understanding the dissociation from the one side of the sport to the other. And it sounds like I've given the amateur riders, and I am one, it sounds like I've given us a lot of slack. um that's not the point. I think it's also understanding what does the top riders think they need to do to better educate and communicate with the fan base of the sport.
You will remember on our last episode that we interviewed Russ, who works for the Horse Trust but started life as a Met police officer in the Mounted Branch. It was a wonderful conversation and a great reminder of the great work that the Horse Trust does. For nearly 140 years, they've been providing sanctuary, veterinary care and dignified retirement for horses who need it most. Retired police horses, former cavalry horses, rescue cases, horses who've worked hard and deserve peace. But they're not just about care, they're about change. Through programmes like Way to Win and their Home for More Horses appeal, they're actively improving equine welfare across the UK. If you'd like to get involved, whether through donations, volunteering or donating old tack, visit horsetrust.org.uk. And thank you to the Horse Trust for making this season possible.
This feels like a good moment, because I feel like us lot could talk all night about this topic of conversation, which I'm so grateful for. I think this is, brave and important. But I wondered, I have a question that I ask at the end of every episode. And the question is, Christine, and take your time to answer, don't feel like you need to rush. If you had one thing that you could say to every equestrian, top, middle, amateur, happy hacker, what would that one thing be?
Listen and learn.
What a great evolution.
The current climate that we live in, which to me is, social media, it's in our hand. It's all we do. We doom scroll, we look at whatever we look at, and we go in with the assumption that we know best. We go in with the idea that, well, I already know that this is bad, or I already know that this is good. And people that know me know that I don't recognize people. I'm really bad at recognizing people. Like, I like horses. I can go into a stable and know the routine of 60 horses by the end of the day. I can go into a room full of people with, riders that were at the peak of their performance 10, 15 years ago, and I will have no idea. You take the riding hat off, I'm even worse. So, yeah, I ask all sorts of weird and wonderful questions to people where I shouldn't, and sometimes probably offend. But ultimately, I just think listen and learn to what the other side is saying, or what someone that you're talking to is willing to give you, because there's always an opportunity to learn. And that, I think, has been lost in the current idea of showcasing our perfect life and telling a story that is very often quite self-important.
I slightly wonder whether if 2025 has been the year of conversation, then maybe 2026 is the year of listening. Maybe that's where we're going.
I like that. I hope so.
This was fascinating. Thank you so much, and thank you for being so open and actually, you know, there were some pretty tricky topics here, but you were very open, and I actually felt incredibly balanced without being defensive or patronising, and that is actually a very hard balance to strike. So it's been lovely, as expected, obviously.
Wow, you're too kind.
I think your point about the listen and the learn. I think for me, like the thing that comes up for me in that is like, as a person who works with horses and have, you know, a bit of influence. I've got a fair number of followers. One of the things that I really try and remind people of that I think is so important and adds to your point is like, we are perpetual learners, humans. You know, if we lived in a village and we had a campfire, we'd always, until the day we died, learn better ways to keep that campfire alive. And that, I feel, is a huge part of what I feel is like important as someone who rides but also teaches and all of those things, is to be someone who is always advocating for that perpetual state of learning, that growth mindset. And I think that's sounds like the same for you, you know, listening, learning. And yeah, it's just been a brilliant conversation, and I'm so grateful. And I feel like this is a conversation that I'm going to want to come back and listen to myself in, you know, a while's time, to remind me of the balance that is required with horses.
Yeah. So, Christine, where can people find Equerico's data and insights? Where should they look for them? Because I know you've got more studies coming out, and so I want people to be able to find those.
We try to be very transparent in sharing, you know, information that we do collect. We've got a white paper coming out early January that probably speaks more so to brands, federations, decision makers, and events. But that is about the consumer landscape and what we see. You know, basically you, me, all of us, like what we see in the industry. We try to do those every year. We started last year. We do weekly polls on our Instagram stories just to understand what people like to, you know, like to see. We did what I think that yesterday, yeah, after yesterday, what people would like to see more of. And it's fascinating the interest there is for data. We also have weekly news and, you know, general, not just marketing talk, but general conversations around the industry happening quite a lot in our grid on socialgram, on Instagram. And if people are on LinkedIn, then connect with us there, because we do send a monthly newsletter that generally gets quite a lot of conversations going. And they aren't necessarily just geared around top sport, but they are, yeah, business conversations tied to communications and the wider industry and that kind of thing. But any links, etc., you can go to our website, equerico.com, or like I said, follow us on Instagram.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.
What a way to end the season. It's been good.
Thank you so much, Christine, for coming and talking to us and sharing your views. Feel very grateful to be part of this open conversation, which I believe is so important going forward into 2026.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
thank you for the conversations that you are having with so many different people throughout the industry, because, yeah, it gives us an opportunity to listen and learn.
Yeah. Well, Merry Christmas to all of you who celebrate, and just a reminder that Christmas can be whatever you want it to be, and if tomorrow is a difficult day for you or a day that you feel like you don't want to celebrate, you get to make the rules. So be kind to yourself, do things that you love, spend the day however you want, and we'll be back in the spring. Well, wasn't that wonderful?
Gosh, yeah. I think one of the most interesting conversations I feel that we've had in terms of the future of what we all know and love as riding horses.
Do you know what I was reflecting on as she was speaking? Is just how many incredible, smart, innovative women we've had on the podcast in the last season in particular. And that's not an accident, because we actively try and raise women's voices up. But I just think sometimes, not necessarily in equestrian, but there is a bit of a narrative of like, men do the future, men do the tech. And it's just not true. And so being able to hear from people like Christine, and with such nuance, again, as we've said before, like such balance, such nuance, not so much rose tinted glasses, but a real understanding of how we actually move this industry forward. Just great.
Yeah. And I hope that you can, take some learning from this, basically, and understand that those of us who have platforms, those of us who have voices, we really are thinking about this. We really, really care about what is going on and where this is going. And I hope I speak for, equestrians, like, we do all love it, and we love it as a sport, basically. And I really hope that these sort of conversations can be taken and in a forward thinking way, not in a, they don't put anyone's back up or anything like that. And if they do, that maybe then the conversation can be had around the improvements that need to be made. It was brilliant. And everything that I think, it felt like it really summarised what is important to us. And that was really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, and now it's Christmas. And it's time for us to say goodbye to the podcast for a little while. Rhi, you had a lovely message that you wanted to share about Christmas.
Yes. Well, I was just reflecting. It's Christmas Eve, and Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate. But I also just wanted to take a moment for the people who maybe don't have a wonderful Christmas planned, or find this time of year really difficult for one reason or another. And I just wanted to remind you that whatever you do tomorrow is totally up to you. You don't have to celebrate. You don't have to see anybody. You don't have to do anything. And so I would just encourage you to take that pressure, the societal pressure maybe off. Do something that makes you happy. Do something that is kind to you. What would you do for your best friend on this day if you knew that they were having a hard time? And do that for yourself.
Absolutely. And yeah, I thank you, everyone, for being here for this season. Thank you for sticking with us as this podcast has evolved. It feels like it's growing into something really precious, and something that we really have learnt and become to cherish. I really cherish this time that we spend together. I had a conversation with somebody this week. We had a consultation call, and I said, have you got any more questions at the end? And she said, well, I haven't got a question, but I just wanted to say thank you. She said, I followed Rhi and you for a long time, and then when you came together and created this podcast, she said it was like this moment that she couldn't quite believe that that's the choice that had been made, because she loved the, what we say, loved our social media at the time already. And she went on to say that, we have become like a real space for like understanding, and a kind of a real voice for things that she felt were needed to be spoken about. And I was just really grateful that she shared that. It was a really cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, God, I feel I'm like welling up a bit. You can't hear it because I'm good at hiding it in my voice, but I feel quite. I just feel quite emotional. Yeah, I felt quite emotional about my Christmas message anyway, but I also feel emotional about this podcast, because I think what is amazing is obviously Miri and I get to see how many listens we have, and seeing that get pretty substantial this year, if we're honest. It's not, this is not niche. And like the feeling I get knowing that like, it's not just like a few of us in a room that care about this and want to do this. It is a lot of people who are tuning in to have these conversations. And that gives me a lot of hope. When I get worried about what our sport is and why people are in it, and whether that's a good thing, these are the moments where I think, no, actually, there's a lot of people here who want to move in the right direction. And that's really cool. So
Merry Christmas, everybody, and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everybody. And we'll see you. Well, we will see you in the spring, but we were saying we may just pop up for the odd episode here and there, just for lols, just to keep you on your toes,
Got something important to share. I'll have to give an update on the yard, because some people don't like social media. I do have people that do only follow me through, like say only do YouTube or something. So yeah, we'll be back. Thanks, guys, for being here. We appreciate you more than you could possibly realise. Goodbye for now.
Bye for now.